George Samueli is, as I say, the author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. And he joins me now. George, thank you for being with us. Some say there's no God. Some say there's no God. But the demise of Madeleine Albright on the eve of the anniversary of the savage assault on that European capital is particularly piquant, is it not?
Very piquant. I can't say that exactly a very sad day today. And as you say, that bombing of Yugoslavia went on for 11 weeks, every single day for 11 weeks, 78 days. And what triggered that bombing? There was an agreement, a so-called agreement at Rambouillet. There was no real agreement at all. It was just simply a diktat that was issued to the Serbs that they had better comply with this agreement, because if they didn't comply with this agreement, then they would be bombed. And now the Serbs knew that they were walking into a trap, so they complied with a large part of it. But there was one sticking point, which was an uncontrolled, unrestricted flow of NATO forces throughout Yugoslavia, and that they would enjoy total immunity from everything in Yugoslavia. They balked at that. However, NATO kept that very quiet. No one really knew that that was the issue on which the Serbs said no. And instead, they said, oh, the Serbs are so horrible, they refused to come to a very good agreement. As I say, it wasn't even any kind of agreement. And then they launched their bombing campaign. And it just went on, and there was just no stopping it. So that, as you say, George, is completely forgotten. So just become ancient history.
Yes, it is amazing how quickly something is designated ancient history. This was, of course, in 1999. Now, the bombardment was, of course, a humanitarian bombardment. Clinton and Blair had arrogated to themselves alone the right to protect. They even theorized it, RTP, right to protect. Of course, they were highly selective in who they decided to exercise that droit de seigneur over. Right. They never dreamt of protecting the Palestinian people, for example, under decades of military occupation, but they said that they had the right to protect. And when their bombing, as bombing always does, started to massacre innocents, like the refugee column that was bombed by NATO, I saw a quote, I hadn't seen it for more than 20 years, from a man I mercifully haven't seen for more than 20 years, Jamie Shea, then the spokesman for NATO. He said the pilots had dropped these bombs in good faith. In good faith. That exculpated everyone from the crime.
Yes, yes. That's exactly what it was. And if you remember, they justified the launching of the bombing campaign. They said, oh, these terrible Serbs are committing these horrific crimes against the Albanians. The problem was they didn't really have any evidence that the crimes such as they were in Kosovo could possibly justify this massive onslaught. But then there was this massive flow of refugees in response to the bombing. I mean, what's what happened? People start fleeing. And then this flow of refugees, as a direct response to NATO's bombing, was then used as a justification for further bombing. Look what the Serbs are doing. They're driving out these poor, innocent Kosovo Albanians. We have to bomb that much harder. And then, of course, again, totally ignoring the obvious cause and effect. The bombing came first, then the flow of refugees, and then they turned it around and said, oh, no, this was the Serbs who were driving them out. That's why we had to go in and bomb, because this is the kind of people that the Serbs are in the business of doing. This is the ethnic cleansing that the Serbs are seeking to practice.
I remember it so vividly. I lived through it. I was one of a very few members of Parliament that fought it every day in the House of Commons. It was like beating your head on a brick wall. It was Kafkaesque. It was catch-22. It was everything rolled into one. But the egregious crimes against Yugoslavia did not end there with the bombing, did they? The unilateral, illegal, unilateral declaration of independence by Kosovo was promptly recognized by the NATO countries, a right that they never accorded to the people of the Crimea, for example, or the people of the Donbass. Talk about this double standard.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Keep in mind also that there was a United Nations Security Council resolution 1244 that was adopted in June of 99, just after the bombing, which explicitly stated that there can't be any kind of a change of status to Kosovo or anything without another major negotiation involving all parties and the United Nations. So there was a violation directly there of the UN Security Council resolution. But that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head with George, because of course, even before that, during the breakup of Yugoslavia, which took place in 1991, 1992, the NATO powers, the Western powers, rushed to recognize obvious illegal secessions. I mean, the secession of Croatia and Slovenia had been taken in violation of the decrees of the Yugoslav Constitutional Court. And this wasn't a Serb Constitutional Court. This was a Yugoslav Constitutional Court. It had 8 judges, each judge representing a specific republic, Yugoslavia, and the 2 autonomous provinces of Serbia. So 8 judges in the of the Yugoslavia Constitutional Court had ruled those secessions illegal. Nonetheless, the NATO powers rushed to recognize them, and then, despite the pleas of the UN Secretary General at the time, Perez de Cuellar, was that don't do this in Bosnia because you're absolutely guaranteed to cause a civil war in Bosnia. It was just because the people who wanted secession were really not even a majority. And nonetheless, the Western powers did it. They rushed ahead and recognized the independence of Bosnia, which absolutely guaranteed the war in Yugoslavia, war in Bosnia. And then you have the same thing, as you say, with Crimea. Oh, no, we can't possibly recognize Crimea. Transnistria, no, we can't recognize that. South Ossetia and Abkhazia, no. So you see what the standards are here. If they think a breakup is to the advantage of the NATO powers, they go ahead and recognize the breakup. If they think a breakup is not to the advantage of the NATO powers, then it's absolutely illegal, unconstitutional. This is just Putin up to his dirty tricks. So there's absolutely no principle here at all, other than what's in the short-term expedient interest of the West.
Now, amongst my many sins, George, I had a long conversation with Mrs. Thatcher about this subject. She blamed the Germans for the premature breakup of Yugoslavia, for the premature and, as you say, quite illegal recognition by Helmut Kohl and Germany of these illegal secessions. I mention it because, not to name drop, because I'm a bit embarrassed that I had a long conversation with Margaret Thatcher, but the situation that we now have is that Germany is back. What could possibly go wrong? There's going to be a European army with a German corps. We've got the Iron Cross on military vehicles in Ukraine for the first time since they were chased out at the Battle of Kursk. Some fools demand more military spending and more military swashbuckling by Germany. I don't know about you, I'm older than you, but it doesn't half make my blood run cold. Achtung, and Schnell are not words that I want to hear piercing the night in Europe in the 21st century?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because Germany played its hands very, very cleverly. They've kind of, hidden behind the European Union, behind this whole very bland, friendly, kind of cheerful exterior. But remember what they did in the case of Yugoslavia. That wasn't just simply an oversight. This was the first act that Germany did after becoming unified, just within a few months of reunification, after all the promises that Helmut Kohl made to everybody that, henceforth, only peace will emanate from German soil. Never again will Germany engage in any of the terrible things of the past. Boom! They move in. Where? Yugoslavia, where they have a long track record of playing off the various nations and nationalities off against each other. And again, whom did they back? Well, their very allies in World War II. Whom did they demonize? Their enemies in 2 world wars, the Serbs. So now we come to Ukraine. Well, who created Ukraine? Germany, Imperial Germany created Ukraine during World War I. Everything that has going on now within Ukraine, the whole story of Ukrainian nationalism, OUN-B, Bandera, Mykola Lebed, all of these people, they were all created by Germany. They all worked for Germany. It was Germany who really was the architect of this rabid, xenophobic, Russophobic Ukrainian nationalism. So when Germany then pops up and says, well, we're just part of the European Union, we're supporting Ukrainian independence, well, I'm sorry, but there's a long history here of German active involvement in Ukraine. Why? Because they were using Ukraine against the Russians. It was always, well, that's what they were doing. They were using Ukraine against the Russians. And lo and behold, as it's always the case, the Americans have simply taken over what the Germans had been doing in the previous world wars.
If I were France, I'd be anxious about this new Germany that is slouching to be born. Germany invaded and occupied France 3 times from 1870 to 1944. That's a lot of occupations, a lot of invasions in a very short time. Do you think Macron is at all anxious about all this?
Well, I guess he is. But the problem is that he hasn't shown any real leadership. I mean, the problem with Macron is that he comes along, says good, intelligent things at times. When he said, NATO is brain dead. When he says, we need dialogue with Russia. We shouldn't create a security system in Europe that is directed against Russia. Russia should be a part of the European security. All this is very nice and very fine. But then he never really follows through on that. He never really pursues the sensible agenda, which was always to bring Russia into Europe. And of course, if Russia does become a part of the European security system, then the problem with Germany then goes away. Because, as always, with France and Russia together, they can balance out Germany. But if Russia is pushed out of Europe, which seems to be where everything is headed now, then again you do have a problem with Olaf Scholz or Sergeant Schultz, promising to massively increase German military spending. Then that becomes a problem. Who exactly is going to balance out Germany?
Well, maybe the French will have to turn to us again, George. That would be, particularly piquant. Lastly, there's every sign, and Schulz himself, whose father was an SS officer, by the way, Schulz himself said today that they are going to end their dependence on Russian gas, but it cannot be done overnight. In fact, it can't be done over a year of nights, or even 5 years of nights. All the signs are in multiplying prices and economic problems coming down the pipe, and with a banking crisis looming. Putin said today that the West has defaulted on Russia by by freezing Russian central bank assets. In days to come, the consequences of that will become very much clearer. All the signs are that all this activity has been to drop a large stone on our own feet, isn't it?
I would have thought so. And Scholz said today, and he kind of dropped a big stone by saying, well, you know, the sanctions shouldn't hurt us more than it hurts Russia. Well, it's a bit late now suddenly to realize, yeah, it's actually really seriously hurting us more than it hurts Russia. I imagine what's happening in Germany is that, you know, the big corporate titans have gone to Scholz and said, look, you know, you can't cut off, you know, Russian energy. We need that, the oil, the gas, the coal. Otherwise, our great German economic miracle, our Wirtschaftswunder, is just going to go down the toilet. And these are the people that Scholz has to listen to. You know, the other day we had the head of the Deutsche Bank said, we can't do any more sanctions. You know, otherwise, you know, the German economy sinks to its knees. You know, the one thing Germany still has to be proud of is its economy. I mean, it used to be very proud of its formidable military. Now, you know, that's on the back burner. So it still has its economy to be proud of. But if this economy is just going to, you know, go down the tubes, then, you know, Europe is going to go down the tube. I mean, Germany is the economic powerhouse of Europe. And I think these people are now going to Scholz and saying, enough already with the sanctions. Otherwise, we are in real trouble.
Yeah, just when we've got a large number of Ukrainian refugees heading towards us. George, thank you very much for joining us.